you say is automation today in its current form, and what will it be in the future?
Yeah, I think for us in marketing space, big data brought a really interesting problem. Previously, when you were looking at segmentation, you would look at demographics. There's gender, there's age, there's location, and we're going to think that we have 5 segments, maybe based on the income, maybe based on the gender, based on the location. And then suddenly, one day you wake up and you have 500 different attributes to describe people, and you have about 1,000 different types of events that you can describe people, and you realize that suddenly gender actually doesn't predict anything, and age doesn't predict anything. But what really predicts a lot of things is weather. To give you a good example, I came from AdTech to Leanplum, and we were looking at what are the things that predict loyalty to games that you download. And one of the big predictors was snowstorms on the East Coast. Whenever it's snowing for 3 days, people who download games tend to stay loyal and play them for the next 6 months. And we didn't know that until AI discovered it, and suddenly, during the snowstorms, the cost of advertising go up 3, 4, 5 times. And that's essentially what automation is. It's the ability to actually look at the data in a way that you couldn't do before and leverage that data in a way that you couldn't before to make things more relevant to other people, I think. That's how we look at it.
I mean, I think automation is old as business software. It's really what business software was set out to do from Excel onward. If you look at the amount of math that human beings can do with a ledger, and then you put Excel in front of them, like you realize the power of automation. I think that kind of is the journey that we've all been on for 30, 40 years in business software.
Right.
Where is it today and where it's going? I mean, I think there's a lot of trends relevant for this conversation. I think number one is that the interfaces have changed and the kind of expectations of where people work and where they receive information. That's changing, and that's going to continue. I think another one that plays in Workato's favor is really the proliferation of different software categories and different niche solutions. And so, 20 years ago, you got software as an enterprise from 5 companies, maybe even 4, right? Maybe 2. Nowadays, we're a company of 1,200 people, and we have like 400 different enterprise applications because software has become cheaper, it's become easier to build, cheaper to build. All these trends, cloud, have led to this proliferation of software and proliferation of categories of software. And so I think that plays into the automation narrative in the sense that automation has a lot higher expectation in terms of the number of systems that it needs to touch, right? So it used to be moving data between 2 or 3 important systems of records. Now it's literally to complete a workflow in a modern enterprise that might go across 20, 30 enterprise systems. So that's another one, which is just automation has a much higher mandate because of the number of systems. And then finally, I think is AI is kind of the undeniable trend and synonymous with automation, and I think the impact of that over the next 10 years is an open question.
That's a cool story. So for me, I think where we are with automation, or where we should all strive to be, is really moving from just automating the repetitive tasks to really creating human-machine collaboration and enhancing what our employees are able to do. It's not about replacing employees or automating their jobs away. It's really about gaining more leverage with those employees and giving them a tool set that they can use that's powered by AI and integrations and automation, so that their jobs become more interesting and a lot more effective. So that's really where I'm focusing a lot of my time right now, is on that collaboration between the employees and the machines and the algorithms.
The one dimension by which this wave of automation is different is that there's a notion of cognition, the ability for software to learn by understanding different types of input, assimilate that, and actually get to a point where it can actually decide and take actions independently. So it's not about programming the rules in there, but allowing the software to figure this out. And this is, if you look at it, it's sort of the human senses that are there, the visual inputs, the sound, the voice inputs, and what we all do, text. And the language information that comes in there can this software understand what the meaning of that is and what is the intention behind that? And once it understands that, can it take that unstructured information that's there, convert it into a structured form and allow the machines to act upon it? And that's sort of a big shift that's happening through these AI capabilities, and that's the area we're focusing on, and particularly in the area of, I'm working in the area of understanding language and the way people speak in the company, with customers, and what they're expecting to get done, either to find an answer, to get an action done, or have a complaint be addressed and acted upon very quickly.
Awesome. So just picking up on that, Murali, you mentioned how this wave of technology or this wave of automation, AI plays a huge role in that. And the previous wave of technology that we saw was, for example, work being done in the cloud. All this work is being done in the cloud, no matter what the business function is, completely across the board. So digging down a little bit deeper, all of our panelists today have mentioned AI already. So given that work is now being done in the cloud and these various disparate systems, how is actually AI and bots, how are they contributing to sort of not allowing those data silos to exist and actually making work easier for the enterprise or for customers?
So there are a couple of areas that we're looking at. One is in terms of the interactions that happen, things that require a human agent to interact. These are things where there's an organization that has staffed people. They handle queries coming in either via email, via phone calls, via text, or tickets submitted, and the agents are processing it and getting the answers back. Time and again, we heard from enterprises saying that these human agents are answering questions in these questions that are repeatedly being asked, the same questions they need to answer. Second is their work, they have shifts, and there's certain questions come towards the end of the day, they get carried over to the next day. So there is both a repetition element, a sense of boredom, and also a delay in getting the answers back. So what we are seeing is that are there requests that are coming in that can be understood as they're coming in? And can that be processed by bringing in the right knowledge base article, maybe triggering a right action at the back end in there? That's one type of an effort that can happen either in a conversational mode or can happen at the back end where as they're coming in, the software can look through this queries and maybe even assist a human to say, hey, these are some of the answers that you can possibly give, and accelerate the resolution of the query that's coming in. So those are some of the areas that we're seeing, conversational bots and bots that act as augmenting the human workforce to get things done.
Awesome. If I can actually expand on that, I don't know how many of you guys have seen the demo from Google about 3 or 4 months ago. They were demoing their assistant calling to book a reservation, right? It's really funny because we're, I guess, both building the equivalent of that on the other side. So we're building the system to pick up the phone and make the reservation for you. So soon we're going to have one assistant calling another assistant talking in the human language, so we don't have to communicate with Google. Yes. Well, I think this is an example of a conversation that to a certain extent is unnecessary, right? I remember a story from back 18 years ago when the first mobile bank was created. And someone logged in online, set up their account, and then they got a call from the customer service asking them how that whole setup went. And the answer was, if I wanted to talk to you, I wouldn't have set up my account online. Right? And I think that's essentially what we are doing. We are allowing people to sort of avoid doing things they don't want to do so they can focus on more meaningful things in life than booking their haircut or answering a phone call to set up that booking.
Absolutely. And I think, and Murali, you mentioned chatbots and bots. I know that Brad for Slack, one of the taglines that you guys have is do more work in Slack or do work in Slack. How do you see bots and chatbots sort of playing into the Slack ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it comes back to kind of the types of interactions that people want to have with software that they use, and they want to have those interactions within kind of the natural workspaces where they live already, right? So instead of going to an app to look something up or to approve it, you're right there, you're communicating with people, you're collaborating with people. It's so convenient to have it right there, and it's so convenient to have it actionable right there. I think a couple of years ago, I think people got a lot of fever about bots and about natural language and the promise of interacting with software systems in ways that mimic how you interact with people in real life. I think there's been a little bit, not a downturn in that, but I think my experience has been that that's not a universally preferred experience. That like if you want to look something up in Salesforce, just doing a slash command and saying let's look it up instead of saying hey Salesforce, would you like to look it up, or having some kind of conversation is not necessarily better. And so I think it's more about meeting users where they are than it is about having a natural language experience. I think that may get to the point that it's really great and people love it. Just anecdotally, in my experience, people still are preferring graphical elements that let them press a button and look something up, press a button and approve it, rather than saying yes, I approve, and it's cute to talk to the bot. They've kind of moved away from that to taking simple actions, but it's more about the context in which they're receiving the information and the fact that that's very convenient and available to them than it is about the human synthetic experience.
Yeah, why do 10 keystrokes when you can just click one button? Right?
Yeah, that's right.
No, it makes complete sense. So, one thing that we have today with our panel, it's actually, I don't know if everyone noticed this, but, we have Murali, who's the head of AI. We have Sebastian, who's leadership with security. And then we have Michal, who's VP of product. And we have Brad, who runs BD and Corp Dev for Slack. And so completely different disciplines across the board. So one thing that would be interesting to hear from the group is that within your particular function, how do you see sort of your work, your day-to-day work becoming easier, either for your teams or for your customers?
Yeah, I can start with some things that I did with my team, because I think it picks right off on the Slack example there. The very first playbook that we created with Workato actually was integrating our ServiceNow interactions into Slack, because Slack is where my team is communicating already, right? And to Brad's point, it wasn't about trying to get a natural language experience, it was just meeting us where we are. And so what we did was every time somebody opened up a ticket that my team needed to respond to, it just came into our Slack channel, and it showed us details of that ticket with like a drop-down list, so we can choose who we want to assign it to, or just a button that says assign to me, right? And then once it's assigned, it changes from red to green, so we're sure that everything gets assigned, right? And this is this is instead of what we were doing, which was, at the end of the day, I might log into ServiceNow and then go yell at my team saying, why are these things not assigned? We're supposed to assign tickets, and what are you guys doing? And they're busy doing their job. So that's one of the first things we did. But and that's fairly basic. Like that took like a couple hours to create that, which was really cool. Now we're getting far beyond that into our security operations. And we have multiple systems that help us automate this, from AI systems that help look at the terabytes and terabytes of log data that we get every day to try to surface actionable insights from that to tell us what we should be looking at. And then from that, the actionable things, then we have automation to actually take the actions. And then from there, surface to one of my analysts the things that either the action couldn't be automated, or we just don't want to automate it because I don't want to rely on an algorithm to go delete email out of my CEO's inbox. I wanted that first to go to a human to click yes or no. I want to do that. Yes, this looks like it's probably malicious, or no, it's not. So there's always those safeguards, I would say, in a lot of our automations. But that's again that human and machine collaboration.
It'd be great to hear from all of you, Murali.
Yeah, so we had, within ServiceNow, there are two areas that we're seeing a lot of activity around. One is within the IT departments within the companies. Some of the examples we heard from Sebastian, very similar ones. The other one is HR. We're seeing a lot of interest in enabling HR-related activities to be handled by through automation techniques, where questions regarding benefits, 401k plans, regarding the payroll questions, or things relating to vacation policies be handled by agents that can understand the query, route it to the right people for approvals if necessary, or bring the information back in so that the HR requests can be processed much faster. Through that conversation, what we are also seeing is that these bots or these agents are actually skilled in a very narrow area. They're not this know-all, can do everything in there. They're actually trained in very, very simple, focused skill set. If they're benefits focused, they just do things around the benefits area. They can answer questions. If they can't handle it, they pass it on. And the notion that you need to see, we're looking at how well are they trained, and based on the interactions that are happening, what are the new skills that it needs to be trained for? And in fact, do performance evaluation on these bots. So they become sort of an augmentation of the workforce, and you need to start managing them from their skill set, the performance, their volume of actions that they're doing, et cetera. So that's an area that we are seeing where defined skill sets for specific functions, and then ongoing training and evaluation and ongoing training of these capabilities.
It's a super interesting point. I mean, I think we see this with our customers too, where there's this notion that when it comes to automation or workflows, it's something that sits within IT only. But to your point, you're seeing that there's huge changes outside of IT as well in terms of with HR. Michael and Brett, I'd love to hear as well in terms of your organizations that don't necessarily sit in IT, where do you see automation playing a role and with workflows?
Yeah, I think, for us, the first thing was essentially being the interface independent, right? We use Jira, we use Slack, we use email, we use, 7 other systems, and everyone has their preference. And, 8 years ago, I remember the battles. The battles, are we going to use this tool or that tool or something else? Now we just use every tool. Things come into Slack, things come into your email. You're able to actually do all the activities from your preferred tool. So then you don't have to worry about learning new interfaces, new things that are not necessarily adding much value because you're just learning how to do the same activity with just another tool. And I think that was kind of the most basic thing. Then, the next level for us, obviously, for PMs, for engineers, for designers, we really rely a lot on data. And, to kind of repeat the example I gave before, we would slice and dice data based on like 2, 3, 4, 5 factors. Right now, we just throw in 700 different things to a random forest algorithm, and 5 minutes later, we learn that the one thing that actually makes a big difference is how many times you visited the site between 7 and 9 in the morning, and that actually is the biggest predictor whether you're going to sign up. Before that, we would never figure it out.
That was my question. How would you figure that out before that, or was there even a way?
Some time ago, I tried to pitch this idea to the CMO. So we were starting to calculate how much human hours it would actually take to analyze 500 different types of events with parameters, with different counts, and determine, for example, the famous Twitter thing that if you follow 12 people, you're twice as likely to be loyal to Twitter. Or that if you make 7 friends in 7 days, you're very likely to stay loyal to Facebook.
Right.
Those kind of analytics are impossible to humans. I mean, you can throw a team of 500 people. It will still take you years to analyze all of those data sets.
Right.
And the random forest algorithm is going to do it in probably under a minute right now. Right? So that's essentially the difference, right? The sort of the very manual task of just breaking the data into sort of different slices and trying to understand how things change as a result is disappearing. I think, what it does is it forces all of us to focus on the creative aspects of the work. And I think, it might be good, might be bad. I think for me and my team, it's a great thing because we like to do creative things. We like to think about the new ideas. I think most of the PMs actually hate the basic sort of rudimentary work of repeating the same analysis over time. So this freed us to actually think about how marketing could look 5, 10 years from now, and that's really the empowering aspect of it. So I would say that's the biggest difference.
Super interesting. Brett, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I do think that a lot of the tools that are available now are enabling automation to occur kind of at the extremities of an organization and not through centralized IT. And I think centralized IT has a hugely important function. They're also, under immense pressure to deliver big projects to an organization. And so, you guys are MBAs in this room. Are any of you guys in BD or Corp Dev or functions like mine? Nobody. Okay, fine. One. Anyways,
There we
you know,
go.
so IT has a massive backlog, and first and foremost, they're providing the IT infrastructure for the company, and then they're supporting the product org and the sales org. These big organizations that have a big mandate to change things for the company, and smaller teams also need process and need automation. Sure. And you know, something that's going to impact my team might be really impactful and small amount of work, but it's just going to be, you know, languish in the priorities that IT has for supporting the company overall. And so we found with tools like Workato and others that, you know, we're able to do stuff on our own, and like IT doesn't see that as a threat. They see that as a great thing, because it's like, great, you can go ahead and do things that support your work, make it more transparent, automate things for yourself, and we can focus on the big infrastructure level projects and supporting, you know, the big groups within the corporation that you're just never gonna, you know, have purview into. So I do think it democratizes things a bit and gives line of business, and especially like more ancillary lines of business, power to plug into IT on their own and to automate things for themselves.
I mean, if I could add to that, I think, you know, one of the very interesting things that we've been observing over the last 5 to 7 years was the fact that the organization becomes more distributed, more flat, and decision-making is being pushed down. I think there were a lot of different books on that topic. I think Teams of Teams was the one that kind of got the most attention. But there's this idea that people who are close to the customer are the best people to make decisions on what that customer needs. People who are close to code know better what needs to be fixed with that code, and essentially the VPs become, to a certain extent, redundant, right? And if you want to enable your teams to do that, you need to create a level of automation where they can have access to all the data that you have on the top. Right. And they can have access to all the data across all the different teams, so they can get the full picture and the full context necessary to make a decision. And that was impossible without automation before. I think the other aspect of it is it also frees non-technical people to get access to the data that typically was hidden before. Right? So I'll give you an example. I used to write a lot of my own scripts to, for example, determine how our costs move up and down for our cost infrastructure. Now, thanks to something like Workato, I can set up a couple of if-then rules and then get that data already structured properly, so I don't actually need to write code. I don't even need to know how to write code, right? And that's essentially the level of automation that enables everyone, regardless of their technical knowledge, to be able to get the information necessary to make decisions.
No, I love that. I mean, pro tip there. I mean, in terms of, automation is not just, I mean, to your point, you're saying that, automation is not just having a bot that's doing some work for you, but also making it accessible to the right business functions for them to be able to go in, and it's almost a journey, it seems like, right? Yep. To your point, if they need to actually make actionable results based on feedback that they're getting from their different workflows, they have to be able to the ones to do it, not necessarily outside of their division. Yep. So it's funny because you actually got to a question that I was going to ask. I was going to ask everybody a pro tip towards the end, so you kind of, skirted past that. I know we're actually, running short of time. I have hundreds of more questions, and I know the audience does as well. But I'm going to ask one more before we move on to the audience. So, I think we've all sat through a number of conversations and panels and been on a number of panels as well. And the ones that I found to be the most useful are the ones that are extremely tangible, that people can actually walk home with something that they could work on. And so one of the things that I think it would be interesting for our audience to understand is, where does that change agent for automation inside an enterprise actually sit? I mean, how, if somebody leaves this room today and is super excited about moving forward with, hey, I have, these 10 workflows that I usually do manually today that I would love to actually move forward with on my own, what does that typically look like in an enterprise? I mean, are they doing it themselves? Are they getting approvals? What is the way that they can actually become a change agent internally to automate their enterprise?
I can go first, sure. I think it really depends on the organization, depends on how tight a control IT has, how liberal they are with the permissions and those things. I just say if someone is looking to do automation on kind of a low-level, simple process stuff, which most line of business people are, my self-serving recommendation is bring that to where people work, and that's in Slack, or other places if you work somewhere else. But I think that's where you'll see the most traction. To have some random process that people have to go to some bespoke app to deal with, it's just going to fail. But if you hit them kind of where they work and make it accessible, it's much higher likelihood of success.
Yeah, I would say pro tip is just don't hire enough people. because when people are extremely busy and they can never catch up with their work, they will figure out how to automate it, because otherwise they drown. And I think anyone who works for a startup, and we are 250 people, but we should be 1,000. And whenever you don't have enough time, you're thinking how I can do things smarter. And then you're discovering different ways, and you're essentially leading to automation.
Speaking like a true MBA, we have a Wharton alum here, so he's all about running lean, all about running lean.
But I'll tell you this, in engineering, they have a saying that, if you bring the pain enough, the engineers will figure out how to automate it. Now it's actually expanding to everyone, because you don't have to have engineering skills to automate things.
I love that.
Yeah, the one point I would add is if you're going to start doing this and bringing it into your company, really try to think beyond automating the things that you're already doing, and think about what are the things that you're not doing that you could be doing. If you have an agent or a bot that can do things differently than humans are doing, and really think about redesigning your processes entirely. Try to start from that sort of design mindset before you just sort of go in and start automating the cranking out of widgets.
I like that. It's a great point. So not necessarily just taking what you're doing right now and doing a small improvement on it, but just rethink the process or the flow completely.
Yeah, just to piggyback on both the last two responses, clearly one where you're just drowned in an overloaded work situation is clearly a perfect candidate, and we hear that constantly from clients. And there, it's critical that there's a use case with a business value that is there, but don't implement it with an idea of having an ROI, but with an idea of figuring out what this technology can do, learn, because we have to learn and adapt and change because it's still in the early stages in there. The second area where we're seeing is that where the person on the strategy side, which could be on the business or even the technology, like an architect, they're trying to understand what these new technologies can do, and identifying areas where they could experiment and try in a particular use case where they have an idea of what all they can do, but they pick one area they want to try this out, and through that sort of bring in that culture of these new technologies into the organization, learn, and then adapt through that. And do that in a rapid cycle so that with the course of the year, they would have had 1 or 2 or 3 trials and experiments before they can figure out where is it really playing out well.
Super helpful. So I had the easy questions. I was saving the hard questions for the audience, so they're the ones that are going to ask you the tough ones. But if you have any questions, do raise your hand. We'll take a mic around. Let me hand this to you. Yeah, so I had to go up over here.
Hi, my name is Michael, and I just want to say thank you for your time, and that was an excellent presentation. My question to you is about adoption. Coming from the legal field, I have a difficulty in about people adopting this type of technology for automation, especially with the Google Assistant, how people will talk how wonderful it is, and then the conversations about how it's going to eliminate jobs and other stuff about ethical situations. For me, I receive threats for creating legal AIs that talk in different languages. So there's a lot of pushback on automation and AIs in general. And I was just curious about how you overcome, if you have overcome, the adoption problem.
Anybody want to take that? So I think the question was...
I might start because I used to be in the ad tech industry, and when I started in the ad tech industry, there was thousands of ad buyers around the world and traffickers or whatever the name was, and right now I barely can find one on LinkedIn. And the reality with adoption is it generally happens that 1 or 2 companies adopt it, and they just get so much incredible advantage very early on that everyone else starts copying them. But there's the negative side of that, and the negative side of that is absolutely a lot of people lose their work. And I think that's kind of I think it should be a recognition for everyone that this is not something that will be stopped. The trend is creative work will stay with us, repetitive work will disappear. So if you are in a field where you're just doing a lot of repetitive work, it's, I actually remember an anecdote from Wharton in accounting class, where we've learned that I think in 2014 there was nobody majoring in accounting at Wharton in the entire school. And the question was why? Because accounting became to a certain extent repetitive. It moved first to offshore markets where it was cheaper, and eventually it was moving to TurboTax, right? And you still have people who will help you with the difficult cases, but 80–90% of people will use something like TurboTax. And I think the recognition for most of the jobs is that there will be the 10 to 20% of cases that really require creative thinking because they are not repetitive, they are not identical to everything else, but everything else will be automated. And I think corporations that do not recognize that are corporations to contribute to the fact that the average life cycle of a Fortune 500 company was 60 years. Now it's less than 15. And if you don't adapt, if you don't make those changes, you will be one of those Fortune 500 companies that are now in the past.
Yeah, but I would add also that just the fact that all these jobs, many jobs can be automated does not mean that there will be millions of people out of work. If we think about in farming, everything got automated. It went from having 30 million farmers in 1900 to 3 million farmers in 1990. That doesn't mean 90% of those farmers are all like standing in the streets now looking for jobs. It just means that we're on a trajectory into different types of jobs across industries.
Yeah, so if I can rephrase, it seems like the consensus is that use automation for these repetitive tasks to allow more time for the creativity, to spend more time on the creativity.
I just want to make a comment on that.
Please.
McKinsey had done a pretty good report on the technical feasibility of automation in the US. It's actually a very good report. I would encourage you to look at it. It's a nice infographic that breaks up work into 6 areas of managing people, doing sort of what they call having or having expertise. Third one is shareholder or stakeholder interaction. And then they have data collection, data processing, and then physical work. And they break that up into across 23 industries, and then they call out given the demonstrated technologies today, what is the probability of automating tasks? And there, as Mike called out, there are 3 areas that they said automated: managing people, applying your expertise. That could be in planning, creative tasks or decision making, or stakeholder interaction, less than 20%. The ones where the probability of higher automation, so like 75%, is that where it's data collection, data processing. Those are the areas where a lot of automation possibilities there, and very likely the tasks that people are doing today will be going away and be replaced with other things.
And if you look at some of the articles and some of the MIT literature and Harvard literature, which here are other good schools that I've heard of. They talk about there are a lot of new jobs that are being created because of this, and they kind of categorize them into trainers, explainers, and sustainers. Right? You need people to train these algorithms and make the automation work. You need people to be able to explain and really still work with the people in the business and create that bridge between what the machines are doing and what the people are doing. You need people to maintain all this stuff. So there will be a lot of new jobs created too.
I definitely let that question run long because it was super interesting in terms of the answers, but definitely want to get to a couple of more. So let's, over here in the back.
Hi, my name is Eric Shang. I run the machine learning and AI group for Motorola's customer service arm. One of the problems that constantly come up when we're developing and deploying AI or machine learning technology is to sit the domain expert, somebody that really knows the business, next to the data scientist and get the mind share between these two people. And because AI is so data centric, and data a lot of times has, without context, it's meaningless. So you kind of have to explain the business side to the data scientist, and vice versa. And of course, the subject domain expert doesn't really care about the random forest or, deep neural network and the reinforcement learning algorithm. So you constantly find yourself, or at least I do, trying to solve that problem at a pretty specific domain level, right? So I guess my question is, how do you guys see the trade-off or the decision between taking a centralized approach, right, having a company top-down centralized strategy to deploy AI and machine learning versus having decentralized groups sort of find their way through, do their own hiring from their own strategy, figure out, okay, I need to, predict, recommend, search, whatever it is that AI is able to do or automate, obviously. And how do you make that balance? And can you talk about your experience on maybe you guys are doing both? How does that work? Because I've tried both. Some work, some doesn't work. And you try to decentralize and there's some shadow AI start to happen because, out of necessity, right? The pain level is high.
I've heard of shadow IT, but shadow AI is definitely
oh, it's happening, right? It's the whole centralized
yeah.
approach that's pushing people.
So if we limit it to 1 or 2 responses, if anybody wants to dive in.
Yeah, if I want, so the one thing is that one is educating the organization across the board as to what is possible, or what is possible and what's not possible with machine learning. Just the basic education, I think, is one thing that we're seeing as a critical value-added item within the organization. The second thing is that there are some core tools that really need to be built by experts in this field. So those tools are available as services that other parts of the company can pick up and use it and create use cases. And you do need some of the domain experts to come in and say, what type of tools would be valuable? What are some of the use cases that are there? Because the AI problems are hard. And you got to figure out which problems to take on. And in the case of natural language understanding, some of them are really difficult ones. So we work with the domain experts to say, what are some of the areas that you would like help, and therefore figure out what problems need to be solved. And some areas we say, these are services available. How would you think of using it? And so that sort of interaction happens.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. I'm gonna cut it off there so we can get a couple more questions in. Yes.
My name is Larry Allen. I'm the oldest guy in the room in all likelihood, but in any case, we used to have a term when I came out of school, and that was when a 360 did the crunching, GIGO. And my question, following on to what Michael was talking about here, is how much of a barrier to adoption of AI is the ease of input by the relevant parties, sitting the engineers next to the users, whatever. I mean, that was a huge problem back in the day. Gee, I can't talk to a geek, I'm a sales guy, da-da-da-da. Is anyone trying to bridge that gap a little bit more quickly, like brainwaves, which I know are in the labs at MIT and Stanford, and I'm pretty sure that's done. Is that even on the radar screen, or are you guys just saying, hey, let's make it happen here, we can pick the right tasks to automate better, faster, cheaper, whatever? Is that a reasonable question?
It's a reasonable question. I think it's a question still very much, to a certain extent, for some of us in the future, because there are so many low-hanging fruits. I would say the barrier to adoption is the opposite, meaning people don't understand how AI will work, so they don't trust it. I'll give you a simple example. A couple of years ago, we built this algorithm called optimal time. If you send someone a message, we'll deliver it at the time when they are most likely to read it. We'll look at their usage, we'll look at what they do, and then we'll figure out what is the time. And then we discovered that only 20% of our customers use it, even though it more than doubles the open rates, and actually I believe it quadruples the ROI on the campaign. And for a long time we didn't know why, so we spent a lot of time with customers, and they said, well, I'm concerned that I'm going to send a push notification to someone at 2 in the morning and I'm going to wake them up. Then they're going to get pissed off and they're going to send an email to my CEO complaining about it, and I'll get fired. So that was the biggest barrier to adoption. And what we did is we essentially created a simulation. We said, okay, this is how you can look at 24-hour window. This is how many people will get it at the different hours. This is how it will look with local customer time zones. This was how it will look over time. And these are the restrictions you can employ on the AI. For example, you will never deliver messages between, let's say, midnight and 6 a.m. By the way, bad choice. There's still a lot of people who work night shifts and they really like their messages in the middle of the night. So you have to always bridge those gaps. But essentially, we call it the opening of the black box. People are afraid of the black box. The moment you tell them what the black box will do, they are much more likely to trust it.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, I think there's, feeds off both these questions, but I think there's only a couple companies in the world that have proven able to sustain long-term science experiments. I think we know what those companies are. And so I think for AI to be broadly adopted, I think you're going to have to marry it with actionable business intelligence and functional specific areas. And I think that's starting to happen. But I think you'll continue to see a lot of innovation come out of academia, frankly, and then also out of a couple big tech companies. And I think the good news is a lot of that is being open source, and a lot of that is coming out of academia, so it's going to be readily available who are applying it to actual business use cases, which is where we'll see the real fruit of this stuff.
Yeah, but I would still say, if you look at self-driving cars, right? How many of you would right now let the car drive itself from here to New York? Okay, how many of you would let the car park itself? Yeah, and that's the difference, right? And after the car parked itself 7 times, you're like, oh, actually, it knows the spatial sort of, problems to solve, and it understands how to do things. Maybe I'll let it drive from here to San Jose. Okay, it drove me safely from here to San Jose. I might let it drive to LA or something like that, right? And that's essentially the problem. We are distrustful by nature of things we don't understand, and this is just a human thing. But step by step, by opening first small use cases and letting the AI do small things for us, we trust it to do more, and we kind of, it's a little bit like with a new employee at the company. You don't let him run the entire company the first day. You say, okay, prove yourself, and after 3 months, he or she proved themselves, and you say, okay, great, now you have more responsibility. And I think that to a certain extent, we've seen the same thing with AI.
That's a great dialogue. Let's do one last question before we finish up here.
Hi there. My name is Allison Schmidt, and I was wondering if you all have thoughts on whether companies have a moral obligation to help reskill workers that do lose jobs due to automation. And I recognize that technology over the course of hundreds of years have always replaced jobs, but this seems to be different in terms of the speed and the scale of that happening. So I was wondering if your companies are talking about these things or if they should be. Thanks.
No, we're not seeing that conversation inside the company. I'm still new to the company, but there was one customer I was working with. They had about 300 people, 3,000 people in the customer service area and about 600 people on the sales side. And they wanted to automate a lot of the customer service functions, and they knew these jobs were going to go away. And the expectation was that they would retrain a good chunk of that group into the sales function and see if they can drive the sales part of it. So there was a clear recognition that jobs are going to go away, and there's also some thought around where they could be applied and how they would transition.
Yeah, and one thing that we've also seen with our customers is that the use of automation internally has never been to eliminate roles necessarily, but it's been a lot more to save time on existing tasks, or also to remove errors from tasks that are happening, or to remove data silos, or to, Michael's point, to allow for insights that were never allowed for before. And that's something that we see time and time over for the majority of our customers. Rarely is it ever cost savings for removing staff, but it's much more around cost savings from further insights that can be driven out of the company.
I would say actually some of our customers do think that when they adopt us, they will remove staff. That's the initial idea, right? We're going to get some cost savings. It's going to be great. But in marketing, most of the people who work for them are actually highly trained individuals in the first place. And what they realize is they actually misapplying the people. They have people who graduate from something like Wharton or Harvard or UCLA or another good school who are really creative people who are doing repetitive job every single day, and to a certain extent, they become dissatisfied with their job and they quit and they start looking for other things to do. So to a certain extent, I think, it's kind of an interesting conversation. We had the conversation with one of our customers who was believing that 60% of their workforce will be let go, and none of them were let go. They actually hired more people as a result, because what changed is they actually started doing much more. So instead of sending 5 campaigns that did the same thing, they started customizing it. They started thinking, okay, now I understand that I have 700 types of different customers among my set of 30 million customers. How do I craft messages for them? What kind of messages they will respond? How should I think about the psychology of what we do? And it essentially moved from basic data analysis to much more sophisticated, essentially, the cooperation with AI. Because AI can figure out things to a certain extent, but it cannot figure out very creative things, at least not for another 10 years. And that's where humans come in, and they actually say, okay, I know that the algorithm says A, but really, as a human, it's a stupid idea. Let's do B. Let's override what the algorithm says, or let's enhance it. And I think, so far, what we've seen is actually the opposite. So more sort of job satisfaction as a result, because you just don't do boring things. So that's been our experience so far.
I would just add that I think very simply, we're creating so much data in the world, which is creating so much stuff to do, that all we can possibly do is try to keep up. I don't think we can automate away tons of jobs. I think we can just try to keep up with all the tasks and the stuff that we can be doing with all this new data that exists every day, gets created every day.
Excellent.
And to Brad's point, it wasn't about trying to get a natural language experience, it was just meeting us where we are.